the end-of-life guidelines. And they had lawyers, clergy, all these different fields come together to try and update the treatment of people at end of life. And what was happening is there was this fear of opiates. And so people weren't getting palliative care because people didn't know how to give them properly. And it was like, oh, you're killing people by giving them, which isn't the case, actually. People think, oh, if you're on opioids, it's going to kill you. No, not if it's given properly. It just makes you comfortable. At any rate, that is a gorgeous area.
I don't want to get hauled in front of a medical ethics board and have to defend. They wrote the prescription.
Exactly. So, but that is a beautiful part of the country. Fro, do you have things worked out?
I have.
Of course, I'd rather they focus on radical life extension.
Good. I'm with you. Yeah.
Super powerful.
I want to make it out to 200 plus.
Yeah, good luck with that. You and Kurzweil.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, we're recording now.
And they can upload me.
It's all good. So, Günther, I think the question from David was, what is your end goal? I have a follow-up question to that, but is that what you were saying, David?
Yeah, and I was just making citing the aphorism, deploy or die from the Media Lab as opposed to demo or die. So now innovation happens without big corporations necessarily throwing tons of money at you. You can just build something because the infrastructure is now there. Either not just 3D printers, but just in all of the resources that are available to people. So we're seeing innovation happen at a small. You innovate, deploy, and then you worry about hiring MBAs. That comes later, and that's what I was saying.
And Günther, you're doing exactly the opposite, which is what we really want to hear about, because anybody can deploy now, but that doesn't mean it's sustainable. You've been through many deployments and learned the hard lessons. So I think what David said is a great starting point for you to come for your perspective.
Yeah, it's well, these are two very, very good points, and I have to be careful not to get lost, and so I have to think about this question for a bit before I give an answer. It is true, today you have many possibilities and lots of materials that you can use. I think the gaming industry is a very good example of this, and well, essentially all the multimedia software that you have at your disposal. Also, there are many tools for the web, of course, so it's just a few clicks. So if you really invest your time, you can get up something running very quickly. And we have seen many innovations on the web, and I guess we'll continue to see many innovations. And yeah, that's I think, yeah, that's fine on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm always a bit worried about integration. And so with all the tools and all the possibilities that you have, there's one problem which well, some people call them data silos, and where you have all your data scattered in all kinds of applications, and now you're trying to piece all the bits and pieces together. It's one thing for sure, but another aspect is that the reason why we are seeing, I think, so many different kinds of well, applications and services is that there always seems to be a gap or something missing that you want, and somebody else figures it out, which is fine, because with all that variation, we see more possibilities. At some point, I guess you need to consolidate, and that's a bit difficult, because although you have many tools, so people say, well, just use the right tool for the job, which is a reasonable advice. The problem is, if the tools are entrapped in different environments, you have this situation where you just can't pick up a tool and transport it to another environment, which is a bit like, I don't know, let's say I pick up a a highlighter. So in my office, well, it's fine. I can highlight my entire office. But once I leave the confines of my room, well, not only don't I have the highlighter anymore, outside there is no concept even of highlighting, and I have to reinvent what's already, so to say, in the conceptual space of my office. And although that sounds very abstract, I guess, we see that on the web. So many possibilities, but not everything. So desktop gives you more free choice, gives you more choice than the web, and so people try to combine different technologies, and it's the combination that's at some point become intractable. The bigger point to me is first of all, so I'm working on a project, and that's it's just about the investigation of new interaction models. So which and it can explain that later on if it's of interest, but already of course it's apparent that that with all the research that is already or has been put in place for a few decades, now we're trying to pick up the bits and pieces. So there's a huge trail of papers, and of course that's an excellent use case for highlighter as well. And but it's apparent that that a lot of work is actually is being lost, and mistakes are made. Mistakes because important insights are being overlooked, which practically manifest in systems or that are incomplete, fragmented, difficult to use. And so what we need is, of course, I need is a better way to structure all my findings and research, which is just what actually the demo should be about. Just I didn't have much time this week, fortunately. And it's just about a collaborative working space, which I guess it's a bit like could compare with a spatial hypertext system. But there's always a tangent to what I'm doing, and it is that, and that's something that I still have to sort out. Is that actually, I mean, what you want is a system with which you can negotiate new kinds of behaviors. So that means if there's something which you just don't quite like or just doesn't fit your workflow, I mean, ideally, you should be able to engage, to have a conversation with the system and say, hey, well, this is not exactly what I want to see. Maybe can you show me, I don't know, a different way how to display, for instance, my research items, or maybe could be something trivial even. I don't like how zooming works, or I'm not, I need to recalibrate this. And of course, if in that point of view, everything in your software system is eligible for change. So in engineering, there is this notion that you have fixed parts in machineries and then you have variable parts. But in reality, if you want to have a truly personalizable system, which is a bit like, it's not really a reachable goal, but it's an interesting outlook, then well, everything is subject for change, which means how then do you engage with your users? And there are different kinds of models, and too many to talk about really. And so this is really is more or less what Xerox PARC they tried to do with the Dynabook, and even then they realized that there were many missing parts, and it wasn't really that obvious then how to help people who are not don't have that much technical background to engage with the system and do their own simulations. But this is a very large goal, and that's isn't quite reachable yet. But that the key, I mean, the key thing is that many of the things we do have to do with scaling. So when you build something very simple, that's what you do, then you can deploy it. But soon you realize, well, okay, the idea, it was nice, but there are additional requirements that I need, because unfortunately no software system is ever finished, and eventually you run into scaling problems, and there are many of those. And what I'm trying to do actually is to figure out ways how to, because I'm one person, how to organize my system such that I can do changes very quickly and stay flexible. And although there are many tools available, that's clear. They all come with big drawbacks, and many. There are really many. There are several aspects that are just missing. And so, first of all, we have still the classical information model. I think that's a huge problem, which means that there is one way to look at things, there's one way to describe things, where in fact there are many ways to look at things, and really just the languages that are used, they are still stuck in this kind of, let's say, 19th century notion. And while there have been some revolutions in physics, it's not there yet in software engineering. So there are projects where, for instance, perspectives play a vital role, which allow you to, to just describe what you want to do in a more compact, in a lucid manner. So, and this already you see in hypertext systems, because of course there are many variations. So you look at a thing, and could be a simple PDF document, and you say, well, okay, but I take a few steps back. Maybe I want to show it. I should just show the outline. And when I get closer, perhaps I want to see many different pages. And you can imagine many of these things. So in essence, it's also the same with, of course, then with computational text, because you have the description of an object, but it just depends on your viewpoint, how you actually interpret what you're looking at. Maybe you use agents. So machine learning is of course now it's very trendy, and you can do amazing stuff with it, and it's all fine and well. At some point, you also want to know, when you engage with the system, what I'm seeing, how exactly did what's the reasoning behind these judgments, for instance, that are made. So there might be correlation between, I don't know, two data items. They were abstract, and then I want to see, but who made that correlation? How was it made? And are there different ways to, let's say, interconnect my findings? Just one aspect of it. And in the end, of course, you focus then perhaps on a product. And what I'm still figuring out is how to have a more modular approach, and also how better languages also for users to describe their workflows. Hypercard is one example where they try to do it. And yeah, lots of things really involved. So I talked about this in my a few months ago, where what you want is a system that just retains its state. You want a system that can capture incomplete thoughts, and it's a very big thing. But what I'm just doing is to just focus this on just a very simple application where you can collaboratively share and point at things, and make that in a way such that when we know, well, okay, we want something different, so that these requirements can then be embedded as directly and as quickly as possible into the system, but also in a comprehensible manner. And it's a very huge topic. There are many moving parts, and most of the time I've been just trying to figure out what are good workflows for me, what works for me. And you see, the problem is that there are all these promises with that tool or that language or that method. You can do all this and this and this. And especially web is fascinating. So there are many showcases for frameworks, for instance, and you see, wow, that's all possible. But then you realize, well, it is possible, but it's not as simple as you've thought, and you can do what the authors have envisioned. But if you just have in mind that just deviate a little bit, then you see, well, okay, I can't work within that framework now. I've got to choose a different way. And it really has, I guess the problem is that with all the computations that we have, and it's gazillions of services that you can think of. So you have machine learning services, you have services, very simple ones that, let's say, extract text from PDF documents, services that animations, all kinds of multimedia services. And it's just the problem, it's just this agglomerations that we have. So we have all that possibilities, and then part of this becomes repackaged and is now part of a particular framework you have to work within, but where only the things are possible which the author has envisioned. Best examples are text editors. Surprisingly, most of them don't even support hypertext. And then soon you've realized that, well, if I wanted to do this, I have to start from scratch, because I can't comprehend the entire structure anymore, which is an evolutionary history. And yeah, and that's kind of the main problem you have in software engineering. And it's, I mean, at some point, what I'm looking is actually at methods that are more flexible, and where you can just state, hey, well, this is what I need, this is what I want to do. The system has to figure out how to connect the bits and pieces, and this is feasible, but it has to be scaled down, and it's, in fact, it's a very tough problem. And yeah, so that's about it. So that's the grand scale of things. Of course, you can still say, well, I don't care, I just figure out some requirements and then do a deployment. But I don't think that the situation will improve, because we are seeing that, well, I don't know, in the 20 years, things have been getting more and more complicated. And while it's perhaps inevitable, I'm still looking for ways so that you can say, well, here's the system, here's a description of it, here's how I did it, and if you want to change anything, we have all the parts, we have even tours through a system. That's very important. So if you just think about what Frodet it does for reading, this is an extremely important topic, and then you compare, well, what tools do programmers actually have to work with? Well, then the situation is quite horrible. And so that's, of course, there are then special environments that have a bit, that are more grounded in hypertext and allow you to do programming and literate programming, for instance. But doesn't help you very much if you have to change the environment just because there are some tools that are missing. So essentially, what's really needed is a deconstruction of the things that we already have, and how, with the research that has been done in the last, I'd say, 50 years, what were the major mistakes? Why did we get right here? Why do we have to have these conversations? And how can we do it differently? And that means, of course, that many parts you have to start from scratch and to think from scratch again and just pick up, yeah, and consolidate the research, because nobody's doing this. This is the problem, because this is all kind of over specialization, where you are not allowed to have more breadth in your project and just say, well, hold on, this doesn't work. What did other researchers do? And let's think about the problems that we're having for a few years. Nobody is getting paid for this, and it's understandable. But I think it's a bit problematic, and I could give you many examples where you see orders of magnitudes of increase in just the materials that you need, just because you approach things from a problematic viewpoint. There are instances where you have this folding in of complexity, and suddenly your system isn't, I don't know, thousands of pages, but perhaps only 10. And that's a big deal to me, because due to the network effect, of course, we're seeing exponential growth everywhere, and I think we can't afford to have this in software systems, and it's particularly important for hypertext. So if you imagine eventually having a curriculum where you could actually have guided tours through systems and storytelling, that would be a huge benefit. This is not something that I expect will happen in a few years. That will require decades. But I'm just trying to consolidate at least the mistakes in systems engineering, and how they some of them can be solved by just going from a classical information model to a relative to a subjective model. This is something that I'm investigating. I hope I'm not boring you with that, but so I guess I have to stop here. It's already too much.
You're not boring at
great.
all. The
Not
thing
at all
is,
boring. Not at all.
what I think really needs to happen, though, as we talked about before, I think you need to really define a user and a use environment. Because one thing that I have learned over the last 20 years looking at what information is that if information isn't something specific, to talk about information in an abstract sense, it's no longer information, and you're not going to get anywhere. That's so you really
That's
need to
true,
define, you have a bunch of people doing this thing, this is who they are. You have to do that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So at some point, I have to put a stop at this. And in fact, I'm already doing this, but pulling the brakes on this, so that's already have a huge momentum. So so I'm trying to slow down, and actually what I'm doing is that just for the research work that I have to do, and I think it will be 6 months, I'm just thinking about what concepts I can apply and to my environment that will help me to communicate more efficiently, and to just highlight differences or important aspects in research, which may be like liquid space, a spatial hypertext system. And at the moment I'm doing the implementation work and already making compromises which I don't like. This is my problem, of course. And and I'm making progress. I just got used to the thought that I won't be able to solve the really tough problems. It's not possible, but I think it will give me in the small scale then perspectives, and this already is helping me in many ways, where I can see, well, this isn't working, but I know there is another idea, and this is just what I'm applying to that just very simple idea of a collaborative working space. And the only problem is just takes like I said, I had only a few hours this week, and I'm really sorry about this. And but what I'm doing now is just
others have said, please don't apologize for that.
Okay. Well, and there are many things already in place. I mean, over the years, I've amassed a huge code library, so that's already helpful because I don't have to reprogram a lot of stuff, and that's, yeah. And just for the moment, yeah, that's just technical problems really that I have to iron out. So of course, the PDF renderer that I'm using is horribly slow, for instance, and just requires some work on the implementation. And yeah, there's just some, well, these minor annoyances that are on the way. So, but I will iron that out. It's absolutely no problem. And what we will focus on are just two things. So that it isn't that boring, where I have, let's say, just this shared workspace. What I want to have in this anyway is kind of universal undo. So of course you want to keep track of changes and of all events and say, well, okay, what did I do? I don't know, 10 days ago. How did my workspace look like? I think that already would be a huge benefit. So I've always run into the problem where I know that I did some work a few days ago or maybe half a year ago, but now I have to just reorganize my workspace again and put everything into place, and most of the things you have already forgotten, but it makes a huge difference if you think about very simple spatial memory, where you just look at the state, look at how things were instantly, and then it's then there is a huge productivity boost. So so that is what I want, at least a sound or a usable model on time. That's very important to me. I think this is something worthwhile to focus on. And then, of course, the second aspect is the collaborative aspect. So where we just can share and point at things, and there is software out there which you can, enough software suites out there that allow you to do this. But of course, the difference is that if we start from scratch, and it's far easier to factor in new requirements because you don't have this huge thing that you have to extend, and it's really a difference on how you get started. Because, for instance, if you think about time model and just this ability to retain interactions from the very beginning, then it will be a lot easier than to work with a system that simply can't do that, or can do that, but you have to specify for every case on how you, for instance, I don't know, store something, or so you want to have general retention, general persistence on these things. And at least what I'm also trying to do, that would be the third tangent to this, is to have some kind of storytelling in it, where you can see if you have the new requirement, have that at least connected to use cases. That's very important for engineering, because it's no good to have these things all in folders and or in separate document management systems. You just quickly want to get to the point. So this kind of directness is what I'm pursuing. And well, regarding the time frame, yeah. So this week I'll have more time, fortunately, and I just do hacking. So there are many things that I know that I can't just solve right now, even though I'd like to solve them, but it's simply not possible. And so I'm just making compromises where they seem sensible. And then, of course, we also have I would like, it would be great to have then discussions on how things could be tackled from a different perspective. But right now, I just try to get on as quickly as possible and have a session next, hopefully next week, or in next 2 weeks. It really depends on 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 my schedule. So it's a bit erratic at the moment. But
Günther, some of the earlier things you said, I'm kind of cutting
yeah.
you off a little bit because you're saying, you know, getting on with it. You said that you want to have the system be supporting collaboration, right?
One of the
Yeah,
for the demo for sure, yeah.
Well, I mean, one of the important things, you want the system to be collaborative.
That's yeah, that's important, yes.
Right. So that could be interpreted in many, many different ways.
This is true.
So what maybe
well,
we could do, because we're also, there are other topics to cover, but how about if for the next few weeks, we schedule that we have half the sessions where we all talk about what we mean by collaborative, and we record those sessions? Because for me, the academic style of writing a PDF, sharing it, citing it, that is collaboration. For other people, it's working in Google Docs, etc. There's so many different things. And I think that we as a community can really draw some meaning out of, maybe even argue over some of these things to push it further. Like Mark Anderson, he's been talking about with me, we've been quote unquote fighting over different kinds of links and all of that stuff. I think that is very useful. So maybe maybe collaboration should be one of our first topics.
So if I can, let me just jump in here, Günther.
yes.
First of all, just someplace that you could look where people are actually focused on, I don't know if it's the exact same problem, but very similar, is, I'm sorry to say, the United States military and intelligence complex doing something called multi-domain operations. So the idea is, if you want to have situational awareness of what's happening, you need to bring in multiple perspectives from all these different, the signals people and the communication people and so forth and so on. And so everything that's going on in the military IT environment is around addressing this very similar problem that you've just defined. So if you do a search on multi-domain operations, you might find that, oh, here are some people that are at least trying to approach this problem. The other thing, I just, as you were talking, I was remembering back in the 90s, reading criticisms of Microsoft and other big companies where what they were saying is, they give you this software and it's like, here's how you're going to do your word processing, and you have no control over how you want to do it. And what we need, people were talking about the same problem, is something that the user can define the different process. And it sounds like you're saying, hey, this problem's been around since the internet or since software, and we still haven't solved it. And then on the collaboration question, I just want to introduce people to an article I read back in like around 1992, when I was writing my first paper for publication, by this woman from MIT, Granite. And I was reading all these articles on collaboration and learning, and I realized that nobody was defining the term, and everybody was using it in different ways. And I was, as a graduate student, I was like, gee, I don't get this, you know, not realizing that particularly in learning sciences and cognitive science, people are notorious for using the same word to mean different things, and the different words to mean the same things, and making up words to define things. What Granite did was, and Frode, this is maybe a good starting point for the discussion. She created a kind of matrix, and she said, look, when you, and if I can find the article, I'll circulate it. I think it's only available as an image, not a, you know, like if you'd have to OCR it to make it searchable. But at any rate, she said basically, you have collaboration between two experts or multiple experts that are in different fields. So that's one dimension. You have collaboration between people with different levels of knowledge, like student, teacher, right? And you have collaboration where we work together every day and are completely sort of making decisions together. And then you have collaboration where I don't even know you. We're just part of a project that we're contributing to. So we're collaborating. And when you look at those different dimensions, you realize when people use the term and they don't specify what they mean, they're talking oftentimes about very different things. And you don't know what is this? What is this type of collaboration? So we see collaboration as a term that's very embedded in the context of use and has various dimensions. And that might be a good starting point for a discussion on what we're really getting at here in let's say a text-based environment in particular.
I think you also have to take versioning into consideration too.
Mm-hmm. So that's what Günther was sort of getting at. So this is the promise of going back to the old model of functional programming, where time, because storage is so inexpensive, relatively speaking, you can capture the whole history of any different process. And then truth is just, well, whatever the truth is now, or go back in time and that's that truth, and you don't have conflicts anymore. But as Dave Boyer has been addressing the same issue, Günther, you might want to have an interesting conversation with him. But the problem is in a product like Highlighter, if you capture everything, even though you're going to end up with such a big database that you're going to be in the terabyte if this thing scales up. So maybe you need some selective, okay, this looks like something that should be saved. Let's take a snapshot in this point in time, as opposed to every single action becomes part of the timeline. But at any rate, that's all I wanted to say.
It sounds, David, that you agree that we should carry on these discussions for this, because we're very lucky to have Günther here trying to work on a fundamental level. So a lot of chit-chat that would normally be chit-chat probably can be quite useful when it's coming from that perspective. Huh?
Yeah, I agree.
It's interesting to talk about this sort of thing of also about sort of, I heard Peter mentioning versioning. There seems to be, so come to see something of a disconnect between sort of human notions of versioning and software design notions of versioning. So you can take a Google Doc and you get a sort of scrubber in it, and it'll go character by character. But that actually, in human terms, is pretty meaningless, because we may type the letters in one at a time, but we don't really. That's not how we sort of think it. So that's something I've really sort of came through to me studying for another reason, but studying Wikipedia a while back. I said the penny dropped that all these people were sort of building great palaces on the fact that I looked at this many edits and I did that, and anywhere were they sort of making any cogent observation about what that actually meant. So that's another sort of disconnect, because at the moment we seem to be building collaborative systems that come from the software perspective in terms of, but we know what all the edits are, so we can go to anywhere, anytime. But call me a cynic. I'm not sure if that's moved us forward at the human end of things. I mean, that's why it's interesting, the conversation I sort of had with David the other evening, so between the two of us, after I've been looking at Highlighter and this way in which we capture stuff, we begin. So one of the areas we're dropping is, I don't think we're working hard enough on mapping our understanding to computer understanding. So semantic systems in computers, however you like it, are fairly hard edged because they live on top of ones and zeros and they don't do fuzzy like we do. But and I don't think you can. I don't think it's a matter of making humans think like binary computers. I think it's us using our intelligence to find a way to feed things that computers can then understand and do things, if only through volume and speed, that we can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't look at me to solve the problem, though.
Well, in this regard, we really do need to decide on a user group. Doug Engelbart had his team and programmers be the whom to augment first. I have chosen students to be whom to augment first. I have a feeling that Günther is leaning towards programmers. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So in fact, I think many ideas that, especially the simple ones, the fundamental ones in hypertext. So because most of the time, you see, one of the problems is that you guys have been talking about incremental formalism. I think it's a very important notion, but perhaps it means something different in the other name. But it's certainly true that that when you work on a thing, you soon realize that that there is another thought. So you realize, okay, the thing that I'm working on well, before I can do this actionally, I first have to solve that. And so your thoughts begin to branch. And but most environments, and if you observe how programmers do their programming, there's just this concept of branching and just recording incomplete thoughts and weaving the thoughts back together in from where you started. I think this this deserves serious consideration and could help just to support this really associative workflow. And yeah, Ted Nelson has tried it, but I'm not aware of really many attempts where this has been taken at a, let's say, a fundamental level.
Well, that seems like definitely an area where it would have to be demo or die, because obviously
absolutely, yes.
Yeah. I mean, when I started my PhD, it was the dynamic view, liquid space type thing. That is what it was. And it soon became clear that it's a very, very, very complicated area. And we see Notion and Rome and the brain and brain's M and all these different things trying to tackle it. I don't think anyone is tackling it for a user like me. I come from an art background. I don't come from a coding background. For me, it's essential how it looks. But the issues you're talking about, you know, now that I'm working on the next stage of my PhD paper, what you're talking about is a huge part of it. How do I park things? How do I organize things?
Mm.
When I ran the survey of fellow students for the biggest problem they have with their citations and stuff, they said, seeing connections. So, you know, if we were in this community to scope doing a graph tool where it becomes trivially easy to hide and reveal branches, just that, huge.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I've been pushing hard on, actually, Mark Bernstein with Tinderbox to do, you know, because it's not just about the lines, it's you know, the lines, the links, but however you want to imagine them, even let alone draw them on the screen. It's the juxtaposition. You know, some things you want to give emphasis, some things you don't. Sometimes you want to see everything that's there, sometimes only the things that are linked or associated. And as important is to be able to say, why does this thing not connect with that? Or why is there a hole here? You know, there should be something between these ideas. So either I've got to go find it or it doesn't exist or something. And that's also remarkably useful, because finding unknown unknowns is always difficult. Yes, David.
Oh, so there is, so go back to the early 90s and the internet emerges, and people in education, some people said, oh, wait a minute, we've been focusing on critical thinking, which is, and if you know argument and persuasion, English 101, 102, you give in little essays and you're supposed to identify the claims or the thesis, and you're supposed to come up with what the logical fallacies are and so forth. Well, I can tell you, because that was the first place we tried out Highlighter, that by and large, students are very poor at recognizing logical fallacies. And you see it in the internet, in the way people, you know, they resort to ad hominem, and they don't even realize, you know, calling somebody an idiot isn't actually a strong argument. But the point I'm getting at, people started to say, oh, in the age of the internet, what's important is intertextuality or multi-document connections. Now, intertextuality was sort of a postmodernist term for, oh, this text that I'm reading today is actually, goes all the way back to Greek tragedies. Even though he's not pointing, this sounds like what Sophocles said, you know, even though I'm reading a modern text, right? And this was this idea of reading almost like hermeneutics, reading between the lines. But this other concept that you're just alluding to of how does what I'm reading here connect to other texts I read? And what you see in the research base is how a person's epistemic orientation greatly influences the skill they have at making connections. And you think, wow, we have this amazing associative memory. Yeah, not so much for a lot of people, because school didn't emphasize that. They didn't get good grades by being a great associative thinker. They got good grades by regurgitating and summarizing. And so now here we are in the 21st century with a very underskilled population as far as doing the kinds of thinking that you just described that are essential for finding solutions to complex, wicked problems, for having innovative thinking and teamwork and so forth. So anyway, I just throw that out, that learning sciences offers a great deal of insight on these kinds of issues because people have been studying this problem at least since the 90s.
Are those insights clarification of the problem, or are they any answers? I mean, I can certainly, again, thinking back to my time sitting up in government, this idea of people not being very good at associative thinking, you know, the afternoons wasted breathing in spray glue while people played with bits of colored paper, and actually really getting nothing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, someone would take a photograph on their phone, take down all the bits of sticky paper, and they'd all get glommed into a pile and stuck in the cupboard. And maybe someone might mention it, but I never saw any sign, and it wasn't clear. I never saw it reflected after such meetings. Everyone would go, "Well, that's very good." It's all about, because everyone gets to say something and play with the paper and glue, which is always fun. But did I see signs that people actually learned anything from it? Not very much.
Mm-hmm. No, we have something that's very broken, but there's a lot of analysis of what's broken, maybe not so many solutions. And the kind of work that Günther is, trying to do is trying to address, how do we make systems that allow for more different types of interaction. And now what I would say, Günther, is tied to what do we know about neuroscience, because that's an exploding field. And there's so many interesting surprises about, how does creative thinking even happen, right? And we're starting to understand that a little bit better because of MRIs and all this other instrumentation. So, it's a fascinating topic.
This goes into, of course, what we, and specifically Günther, will choose to have as the user community, because creativity and logical thinking are, of course, overlapping, but, they require a different focus. I mean, earlier today, spending a few minutes on Facebook, there are people in support of Trump still saying that, there were horrible protests this summer, and they can't quite see that storming the Capitol is a different thing. I don't think we're going to be able to create software to have those complete and utter morons go into it, because they come with it from a religious zeal that has no basis on anything they can point to other than, anyway. This is where I'm a bit worried about going into the notion of just collaboration or just information, because it will, as I've seen again and again, I think you guys have too, it will just vanish into frustrations, because if Günther is going to try to tie together every thread, there will be nothing. I mean, the way that I view Doug's work, he started in the world of nothing, made something amazing, inspired people. But as the world progressed, well, not progressed, but moved on, he didn't do anything to integrate. So that's why he lost traction. Ted Nelson wanted things to be in a very specific way, his way. And it was never integrated into any kind of a workflow or specific solution. The best he did, and I say this as someone who loves him dearly, knows him very well, would say this to his face, even with his brilliantest systems, there was no import-export. You're in Ted's world or F off, basically. Right? So if you don't augment somebody, you augment nobody. So
interesting you say that, Fro, because that's what we're focusing on right now with Highlighter, is the export story, because that's, you got to be able to, as Günther was talking about, these things have to be able to play together. You can't just be off in your little silo. Yeah. That's the problem.
Yes, I love that import-export insight. I actually had a book chapter that I contributed a few years back, and I called it the Principle of Severability. They were talking about how you could get people to be willing to contribute user content to online communities. And my argument was that if you don't have any way to sever that content and extract it out, people are going to be very reluctant to do it, because it's just a matter of time before either something's going to technologically break or there'll be a business failure and that silo disappears. And the knowledge that that's possible, even if it's highly unlikely and might not happen for a decade or two out, is going to be more than enough barrier to prevent rational people from investing in it because of the risk. And if you ensure that they can extract the content, then you'll be in a much better position. So in virtual worlds, I've been arguing, come on, guys, why don't you support JavaScript and Go and real world programming languages? Instead, you have Linden scripting language, which is great, but you can't do anything with Linden scripting language in the outside world. If you have a proprietary programming language in your little virtual community and environment, that's great, but no one's going to invest time in programming that. Plus, they have no ability to leverage all of the wonderful work and libraries that are being done by the outside community.
Yes.
Many years back, I was a member of Media Move for a while, and they had some marvelous facilities for interacting with the outside world. They had Gopher slates, which were like little virtual tablet computers that you could point to Gopher directories and pass from one person in the virtual world to another. So you'd hand the imaginary device to another person in the world. They could interact with it and hand it back to you, and you could see the updates. And we even had some sessions where we were interactively debugging a Moose script inside of the virtual world. So you had multiple people fiddling with the script simultaneously and fixing it. And newer systems are lacking that kind of interaction. Two other points I'd like to make. In the early 1990s, there was a lawyer turned librarian named Stuart Allen Sutton, and he did a PhD dissertation at UC Berkeley looking at user cognitive maps for the law. And his entire paper was describing sort of a brief bank law firm institutional memory model. And it incorporated a whole bunch of SQL tables, because back then everyone was using SQL for everything, and there was no notion of using network models, which would have been a heck of a lot more appropriate for what he was trying to do. But instead, he had all these crazy tables laid out. But the model supported having cases link in to a larger issue-oriented dialogue. So you have like the area of law outline that would be shared by everyone in the firm. Then you'd have an instantiation of a problem in that area of the outline. You'd associate with that issue entities, and the issue entities represented questions of law and fact. And attached to them, you could have evidence entities. Then attached to the evidence entities, you could chain off evidentiary law, legal issues related to what arguments are we going to have to make to ensure that this particular piece of evidence is actually accepted by the court when we come to trial. And it went on like that. And sort of basically it was a recursive structure, because you could have an evidence question spawn additional factual questions, which would then spawn secondary evidentiary questions. And all of this was linked into a beautiful, rich structure. Unfortunately, because this was, I think, 1991 or 92, you didn't have the Node.js infrastructure. You didn't even have decent Java ecosystems in place. So Stuart took a look at it and said, well, let's see, I can go into my handy graphics application, and I'm going to draw all of these beautiful sketches of what my user interface would look like, but I have absolutely no idea how you'd program this thing, and I'm not even remotely interested in programming, so it was never implemented anywhere, even though if it were implemented, it would be superior to anything that anyone could buy now for any amount of money.
So just real quick, we talked to this law firm up in Canada, the head of their IT department. And the idea, what they wanted was this. You have a guy that makes $500 an hour who's the expert on, let's say, contract law. So what they wanted to do was capture his knowledge of how, in the if-then kinds of scenarios. And then he would point, this is the law that applies here, and this is the section that you need to look at, and here's what and create something like our high trails for different procedures. And then that would be available to everybody else as a kind of way to capture the expert thinking. And then you would be able to sort of populate the junior people with the intelligence of the most experienced people in the organization. It sounds a little bit like what you're talking about. To some extent.
Another book reference for you. If you search online, Engines for Education. I don't know if you've seen that before, but that described Roger C. Shank's work at the
yeah.
Institute for Learning Sciences at Northwestern before those horrible federal prosecutors put Arthur Andersen out of business, killing his funding, causing his entire operation to fold up and get eviscerated, even though ultimately at the Supreme Court, all those prosecutions were thrown out because of their egregious overreach, and they killed a wonderful company for no reason. Unfortunately, this collateral damage there was that that line of research that Schenck was working on got snuffed out.
That was case study focused, right?
Also, it was systems that he called, just give me 1 second to think of it, ask systems.
Mhm.
And the idea of the ask systems was to have hours of video of experts talking about incidents that happened in their career and different cases. And then he'd have a group of grad students segment up that video into little chunks and associate questions that could be answered by that chunk of video and other questions that would be raised by that chunk of video. And then he turned that into a hypertextual network. So it was almost as if you were having a conversation with the expert just by using that web of questions and answers to jump through the different indexes of the video. Really exciting work. The main reason that he didn't pursue it further was the amount of time required to train the indexers and go through and chop up the video. But maybe if you had a more suitable user interface, you might be able to ameliorate some of that overhead.
So we
Yeah,
need
and that's
to,
pre-YouTube too.
Work.
we need to.
An interesting, Freud.
No, go ahead, Mark. We can do another couple of minutes.
Sorry, I was just going to say that an interesting thing to me from this is that in relation to the couple of sort of things that have just been described is that a lot of what's being described is association, and I've sort of seen through working career numerous times when someone's come down from head office and said, right, we need to capture all this information and we have this template and all this sort of thing. Actually, the really useful stuff is often just people relating things back. And if you pair that back, what you take away from it was they managed to associate this thing with that thing, and that wasn't, and the sort of relevance of it wasn't written down somewhere. It wasn't captured in some semantic. It wasn't in the structure. So indeed, that is the knowledge that walks out the door when people go. And yet, ironically, most of our structures at present are really, really bad at capturing that. So this is, fun. I've been having some fun playing with Highlighter this week and things. Yeah. So
well, that's the tacit knowledge manager, and I actually wrote a paper on Highlighter as a tacit knowledge management tool to capture those kinds of things that people normally don't even think about because they're just there in their heads and hands, but not communicated. And right, and that's sort of related to what Peter is talking about as well. How do you make that kind of knowledge available so it doesn't get lost and it's accessible?
Yeah, because also a lot of experts don't. That's the other thing I found in the tail end of my service career when I was basically supposedly now the expert manning a desk in this, was that trying to get my colleagues to actually go and talk to anybody else about what they were supposed to be writing down proved remarkably difficult because in their mind's eye, they were now experts. They didn't need to ask anyone anything. And it was genuinely frightening.
You brought up hermeneutics there, Peter, which is interesting because, of course, that means something specific within the legal profession. But also it's become something I've been reading up about lately. It's really annoying because I haven't really looked into it as a discipline because it's such a stupid name. It's just so pretentious. It's crazy. But it seems to me that it is very much related to what Günther is doing. We can call it sense making or whatever, but Günther, you're making a funny face. Is my audio a bit bad?
No, you're good.
No, it's all right now.
Oh, okay.
I'm just concentrating. That's why I'm making
No. It's just that at the same time, I got an internet connection warning, so I just thought those two things together.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah. So,
okay.
All I'm saying is that, from my perspective, humans are interpretive creatures. The notion of a ground truth outside of physics or engineering is just, I think, very naive and boring. So I think in this community, we kind of see things along those lines. So what we're really looking at here is building a system whereby we can perform those things to make that happen. Doug, of course, referred to views as being important that we've discussed, and also interactions. So how can we provide the means to get to grips with a specific body of knowledge? And get to grips with it is, again, I don't think it's interesting even to try to find out, let's say it's something as simple as a document, text document. Someone who wrote that document doesn't have an objective, full truth knowledge of what that document is either. This is something that's core to my PhD. I've been writing about it this weekend, or rather week. When we, going from the tiny in our brain, there is no structure in there of a body of knowledge. If we are asked to imagine a lion in our head, we kind of do that. But then the question is, if you need to draw a picture of a lion, you have to make decisions. You realize it by choosing colors, background, poses, stances, all of that stuff. Similarly, when a teacher is asked by a student whether an idea is good, the first thing the teacher will say, as we've discussed, write it down. Because the act of writing down is an act of realizing it to seeing how parts combine. It is not an act of, other than for the most trivial thing, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but for a point, we don't have things fully formed in our heads. So to believe that when you're reading someone else's work, that your job is to find out what was fully in their heads is stupid, because it was never fully in their head. So the question is, just like when we had issues with the Bible, the Middle Ages, there was a very, very interesting period of time where if two people disagreed about a section of the Bible, they couldn't actually discuss it because it's heresy to say that you know the mind of God. And this doesn't matter if you're religious or not, just as a point of where we are. I think this is fascinating. So there was this big meeting, I don't remember where or exactly when, and they discussed how to deal with this. And they decided that any interpretation that was the most charitable is correct. That for me is why religion has a hope. And how it relates to us here is that we have to decide that if we are providing the tools and infrastructure for someone to get to grips with something, why and in what way? Is it to understand the ground truth? No. Is it for them to get useful knowledge? Yes. We also have to decide morally what we mean by useful knowledge. Useful knowledge to make more money on Bitcoin, or useful knowledge for climate change? These are things that will go into how we design the tools, right? So maybe that is why we need to have more sessions to define the language as we mean. We mentioned collaboration. Collaborate for what reason? To overthrow the government? Probably not. Understanding in what way? These things have to be made explicit at some point. And then, of course, we can forget about it as we go into the work. But anyway, just
real quick, Frode, have you come across Roy P's work on conversational analysis?
No.
So so it's just Roy P, PEA, and basically he says it's kind of like I say something to you, you say, oh, that's very interesting, and you sort of feed it back, but it's actually, I really wasn't totally clear about what I was thinking, and I say, yeah, that's it, and I actually am appropriating my idea filtered through your brain back to me, right? And this is, he goes into how conversation actually takes place, and it isn't this, I've got the truth, here it is. I mean, that happens sometimes, and that, by the way, is the path to genocide, if you read people like von Forrester, but rather it is this kind of back and forth mixing, appropriating, and restating other people's ideas and your own, and so at any rate, that whole process is something I haven't really thought a lot about, but I think it's very relevant. You just sort of hit on that whole, what does it mean to have a conversation, and how does meaning build in the process of collaborating and interacting with each other.
Yeah. So we're way over, which is nice, but
Yep.
We all have things. Look forward to Monday. Shall we plan to cover some of this more specifically on Monday, or what should we? How should we build our future?
Well, whatever you want on the agenda.
Okay, well, let's keep some of this in mind on Monday and fill Günther's head with all kinds of contradictory stuff. And
Right, there we go.
keep
And
it
I'll
moving.
send you the link to this recording. I assume I have to send you a link. You can't access it, right?
What do you mean?
I'm recording this
Oh,
session. Do I have to send you the link to it, or do you get access to it?
I think you have to. I may also be recording it now. We may be doing a double record, which is interesting. But
Okay.
if you just yeah, put it on Dropbox if you can or something. I'll tell you if it's. I'll send you an email right after this if it turns out I also have it.
Okay. All right.
All right. Bye everyone. Have a good weekend.
See y'all. Yep.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.